Inshallah, in this video, I'm going to explain to you through the Qur'an that the way to learn Arabic, according to the Qur'an, is by not focusing on vocabulary. I mean, we've been talking about this. My last two videos, they did go viral, and one of them has over 10,000 views in 4 days. Okay, for a small channel like ours, that's a big deal. So something resonated, and I gave an example in my previous video of a particular structure that looked like a single word and was giving 7 meanings, and that was mind-blowing. And it was the height of comprehensiveness. But what I'm going to do in this presentation is give you a verse of the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in Surah Al-Ra'd, وَلَوْ أَنَّ قُرْآنًا سُيِّرَتْ بِهِ الْجِبَالُ أَوْ قُطِّعَتْ بِهِ الْأَرْضُ أَوْ كُلِّمَ بِهِ الْمَوْتَى بَلْ لِلَّهِ الْأَمْرُ جَمِيعًا. Had it been the case that the Quran, through it, mountains could be moved and large distances could be traversed very, very quickly, or dead people could be brought back to life and then spoken to, بَلْ لِلَّهِ الْأَمْرُ جَمِيعًا, rather all authority belongs to Allah. So that's the basic translation of the ayah. I just gave it to you. Now what does it mean? What is it saying? It doesn't make sense because the sentence is hypothetical. The word law is a particle in the Arabic language that introduces sentences. If then, if this was the case, had this been the case, comma, then this would have been the outcome. But it's not giving the jawab. It's not giving the second half of the conditional statement. So that's something that's missing. So we're going to have to fill that gap. And then it says, بَلْ لِلَّهِ الْأَمْرُ جَمِيعًا, rather all authority belongs to Allah. So the word bal is actually a conjunction that deflects attention away from a previous statement and refocuses that attention on something new. So, I mean, it's not very clear what the ayah is saying. So how do we make sense of this? So step number one is to look at the earlier verses and try to establish a context. So the scholars, they tell us that the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca, when he was presenting evidence, instead of appreciating the miracles, using their minds and pondering and reflecting, they would ask for ridiculous things. And they would say that if we had a Qur'an, that if we pointed at a mountain, the mountain would move. And if we had a Qur'an, that if we held it in our hands, and all of a sudden we would move at the speed of light. Or if we walked up to a grave and the dead person would come to life and we'd be able to speak to them, then these are the kinds of things we need. You know, how cool would that be? So unfortunately, you haven't been able to produce any of this, so therefore we can't accept you. So this is what the Prophet ﷺ was up against. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this ayah in Surah Al-Ra'd is comforting and consoling the Prophet ﷺ. So here's the translation. We'd add some extra words at the front to establish some context, but still we have to struggle with the loss of meaning. And that's the point of this video. That just knowing the words within the ayah is not enough. Like, for God's sake, try to understand that point. That just knowing the words is not enough. So I'm saying it's a tasalli verse. Okay? So that already gives you somewhat of an understanding of what the ayah is saying. So we'd add some extra words at the front and we'd say that, parentheses, instead of making the appreciation of the Quran's miracle dependent on tadabbur and dependent on pondering and reflecting, if we were to make it effortless. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that if we were to make it effortless, for example, if we were to reveal such a Quran that through it mountains could be moved, like you just hold it in your hand, point it at a mountain, and the mountain starts moving, or you start moving at the speed of light. If we were to reveal such a Quran that through it these three things can happen: mountains could be moved, large distances could be traversed very, very quickly, and dead people could be brought back to life and then spoken to, parentheses, they still would not believe. So that's the second half of the sentence. And this is in the tafsir of Jalalain. He says, لَمَا آمَنُوا, they still would not believe. And then it says, rather all authority belongs to Allah. So it's still not complete, because rather deflects attention away, so there's something missing there. So because the scholars, they tell us that bal in the Arabic language is for idrab, to deflect attention away from a previous statement and refocus that attention on something new. So this is something that the ancient Arabian understood this. So when they see that, and they see until dead people would be brought back to life and then spoken to, they realize that the second half of the law sentence is not there. So automatically they'd surface it. They'd surface it and they say, oh, they still would not believe. Like, if all of these things were granted, these requests that these mushriks are making, if all of those requests were granted, they still would not believe. Rather, all authority belongs to Allah. So what does that mean? That means that observing a miracle and seeing something extraordinary, something that breaks the normal cause and effect and the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala governs the universe in a scientifically coherent way. So if something like that were to happen, then we would expect that to lead to a person becoming a believer, right? because it's a cause, and causes generally, naturally lead to their effects. But they only do that if Allah wills it. Okay, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that does absolutely everything, and the entire universe depends completely and utterly on the knowledge, will, and power of Allah. So there's no guarantee that a mushrik will view a miracle occurring before their eyes and automatically they'll become a Muslim. Not necessarily. It will only happen if Allah has willed for such a person to enter paradise. And guess what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not grant guidance to people that are stubborn rejectors. And these mushriks were like that. They had inad, they had ta'annud, they had this obstinate nitpickiness, and they were not desiring the truth. And they even knew the truth. A lot of them, they knew it, but they were refusing the Prophet ﷺ because they were following false religion. And they had a pagan cult in Mecca, and they were benefiting from that financially. And if they were to become Muslim, then they would lose all of that power and prestige. So that's why they would come up with excuses and try to justify to themselves that the Prophet ﷺ is not a real, genuine prophet, even though they knew he was. You see? So what the verse is saying is that they still would not believe, because observing a miracle is merely a cause that you would expect it to lead to its effect. But causes are never intrinsically effective. بَلْ لِلَّهِ الْأَمْرُ جَمِيعًا. Rather, all authority belongs to Allah. Allah is mu'athir haqiqi, and that concludes the verse. So if you appreciated that tafsir, what you will notice is that the first translation I started with, when you compare it with the final translation, where did all of those things come from? Some of it came from the books of tafsir. Okay, I have to admit, some of it came from the books of tafsir. Some of it came from the vocabulary. But the vocabulary is the least important part there. Can you appreciate that? The vocabulary is the least important part. It's the grammar. It's knowing the feature and function of law. And it's knowing the feature and function of bal. And then being able to surface the proper sentences in there in order to complete the translation. So if you like that style, and if you want to take yourself to a level, because what I just showed you there in that verse in Surah Al-Ra'd is pervasive. It's throughout the entire Qur'an. Like, you'll see things like that on every single page within the Qur'an. But the first step is to learn the language. And from the sciences associated to the Arabic language, the most important is grammar. Ibn Khaldun, he says, أَهَمُّهَا النَّحْوُ. He said the most important of all of the sciences is grammar. إِذْ لَوْلَاهُ لَجُهِلَ أَصْلُ التَّفَاهُمْ. Because if you take away grammar, communication ceases to exist. Now we have some people, they make an argument and they say that if you don't have vocabulary, communication ceases to exist. But that's not what he's saying. Can you see that? That's not what he's saying. He said, أَهَمُّهَا النَّحْوُ. Because you wouldn't be able to differentiate between the roles of the nouns, and your listener would be completely confused. You see, vocabulary does have its place and it does have its part, but vocabulary needs to be built organically, and it has to be done once the student has a big picture understanding of how the language works. So I put together a big picture understanding of how the language works in about 3 hours of training that I've linked to in the description below. If you look in the description, you can opt in for it. Just put in your email address and tell us where to send it, and you'll have the 4 videos. And then once you watch these 4 videos, then at that point you can judge for yourself and see whether this method resonates with you. And if it does, then you can sign up for the premium program. And with that said, I look forward to speaking with you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.